Donde sea que vayas, ganas puntos como un pro con la nueva tarjeta American Express de My Lowe's Pro Rewards. En compras elegibles gana 3 puntos por cada $1 en Lowe's durante los primeros 6 meses después de abrir una cuenta. Además, gana puntos donde acepten la tarjeta American Express. Aprovecha hoy. Sujeto a aprobación de crédito. Aplican exclusiones y restricciones. Puntos sujetos a términos del programa de lealtad en Lowe's.com/terms y términos de recompensas de crédito en Synchrony.com/MLBRA-terms. Detalles en Lowe's.com/business credit.
This is episode 424 of That Shakespeare Life.
Hi, I'm Spencer Weinreich. I'm the author of Thinking with Crocodiles, an iconic animal at the intersection of early modern religion and natural philosophy in early science and medicine. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend Cassidy Cash.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
In Shakespeare's plays, there are over 150 references to the word hair, across which Shakespeare talks about a barber fixing someone's hair, about hair being dyed, about losing your hair, and about losing your hair being a natural product of old age. There's references to combing your hair, and there's even one reference about how much someone's hair weighed. Clearly, there was a significant cultural focus on the care and maintenance of one's carefully selected coif. But exactly what did it look like for someone to care for their hair in Shakespeare's lifetime? Was there such a thing as soap, or dare we guess, shampoo, that might have been used to keep your hair clean in the Tudor period? To find out more about what one would use in the 16th and 17th century if you decided to wash your hair, we're meeting with our guest and historian, Julia Martins. Julia's here this week to tell us all about the products used to cleanse, care, and manage a head full of hair in Shakespeare's lifetime, as well as the manuals and advice that were given in the 16th and 17th century for the best hair care methods of the Elizabethan era. Julia is a public historian specializing in early modern European history. Her research focuses on cultural history and everyday life, especially the history of gender and medicine. Julia has studied in Brazil, France, Italy, and England, and holds a PhD in history from King's College London. Julia has a YouTube channel and a blog about life in the past called Living History by Dr. Julia Martins. She combines her work as a historian with activism and volunteering, and she's the organizer of a feminist book club called My Body, My Book Club, which raises funds for important causes each month. You can find Julia on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok at Julia Martins History. We'll place links to Julia's work in the show notes for this week, including her previous episode with us here on That Shakespeare Life. Hello, Julia. Welcome back. So glad to have you here with us on That Shakespeare Life.
Hello, Cassidy. Thank you so much for having me again. I'm just so excited to be here.
What kind of soap was used to wash a person's hair? Was it the same as body soap, or were there specific ingredients when it came time to use hair soap?
So there were many different kinds of soap in this period, right? And they could be either bought or made at home. For instance, household soap, which is like the roughest, it was meant for scrubbing pans, floors, or linens, and it was made using animal tallow and wood ash. And this created a highly caustic substance. So this is not something you want to put on your body or your hair. But the reason why I mentioned this is because I remembered a reference from Shakespeare. So Shakespeare mentions the foul smell in these soaps in The Merry Wives of Windsor, because there's a scene when Falstaff is hidden in the buck basket, right? So he's among the dirty clothes and this sort of rank smelling soap. So we know that some soap did not smell great. Having said that, in the Tudor period, scented soaps were becoming increasingly popular, right? And these were soaps for the body and for the hair. So for wealthy people, you could buy or have made scented soap. For the hair, for bodily care, women would prepare kind of gentle herbal lyes in the domestic still rooms. Lye is water infused with the ashes of specific plants, so commonly fern or ash trees, and that creates a mild alkaline solution. So to make this okay for the scalp, which can be quite sensitive, recipe books in this period instructed housewives to boil the lye with aromatic botanicals to make it milder. For instance, I always like bringing primary sources. So I found in The English Housewife, which is from 1615 by Gervase Markham, there are records of several recipes for sweet waters using rosemary, sweet marjoram, and mallow. And we know that wealthier households also imported Castile soap from Spain or soap from Marseille in France or from Italy. So people had a range of options to choose from. And these Mediterranean products, they tended to use olive oil instead of animal fat. So they were milder and they would smell better. I would imagine you wouldn't run the risk of your scalp smelling of bacon, which I think is is great. Some of these recipe books had also some formulas for making the hair sleek or straight, so something like our modern conditioner. But having said that, neither conditioner nor shampoo were words that someone living in Elizabethan England would use, right, to describe these products. In any case, though, not everyone thought, and I think this is important to include, not everyone thought that washing your hair was the best way to clean it or to clean your scalp. People, for instance, could use combs with very fine teeth, and they would catch anything that you might have crawling on your scalp as well as dirt, which is not a great image. But I mean, you know. And so physicians often recommended using combs instead of water to remove all impurities, bugs included. So hair care could be quite contentious at the time. Not everyone agreed about how the best way was to keep the hair and the scalp clean. So you would get different advice depending on who you asked. Yeah.
So the idea of it was all called soap, but so there were. I'm addressing what do we look for in these primary documents if we're looking for shampoo or conditioner, since those words aren't what we're looking for. We want to look for the word hair along with the word soap because they would describe the soap for its purpose. So
or like hair water for the hair, that kind of thing. Yeah, or hair soap, something like that. Yeah.
Did people really use animal excrement in recipes for things like hair loss, for example?
Yeah, I'm afraid that's a real one. That's a true one. And again, there is something in Shakespeare about that as well, because we know that Shakespeare frequently linked hair loss to the passing of time, which makes sense, right? But in the Comedy of Errors, this is explicit when Romeo jokes that Time himself is bald. So there's this idea of Time being a man who is old and bald. But thinking specifically of excrement, let me just sort of develop the reasoning behind this, sort of be the devil's advocate, I guess. So this is a time when people understood the body and medicine through the framework of the humoral theory, right? The idea that the body had four humors: black bile, yellow bile, blood, and phlegm. And the imbalance between the four humors that could cause illness. So each of the humors was classified as hot or cold, wet or dry. And so when someone wasn't doing well, when someone was poorly, the main way to help them was with a remedy of the opposite quality. So if you had an excess of heat and dryness in you, you would use a remedy to make yourself colder and moister, which sounds horrible, but there you go. Let's go back to hair. Usually, physicians understood hair loss as kind of the result of cold and dry humors dominating the head and the scalp. So because animal excrements in general, really, but animal excrement contains high levels of ammonia, if you apply it to the skin, it creates a kind of blistering, hitting effect, sensation. So it feels like heat, and that would counter the coldness in the humus. So that's the logic behind this remedy. Medical practitioners believed that this topical heat would be able to draw the warm humus to the surface and would stimulate hair growth. So that's why early modern doctors actively prescribed animal dung in treatments for hair loss. And this is not something that was only, like everyone was doing this, even wealthy people who could afford much more sweet-smelling remedies, like the Medici family, they used remedies like this. And I have a specific example here thinking of England, because So this is from an Italian book. It was a bestseller in Italy. It's called The Secrets of Master Alexis. And it was translated into lots of different languages, including English. It was a bestseller in England. And many of these recipes were for baldness. There was one that instructed readers to mix the ashes of burnt bees, mouse dung, and horse excrement as well, plus honey or bear's grease. And you would anoint the bald patch on your head with that. So not a very pleasant remedy, but yeah, there you go. So books like this were hugely popular, and they were easily accessible. They weren't expensive books. So we know that these recipes were circulating everywhere. And yeah, so there you go. Excrement on your head. Not very pleasant, but not that rare. Not as rare as you would like.
It's so funny to me that like they have such an issue with the smelly soap on the one hand, and then they're willing to put excrement on their head. I just
needs must. When needs must.
I know. It's like when your vanity just wins out and you must do what you have to.
I know. I would just embrace the baldness, honestly.
I think I would have to just embrace it. I would.
Yeah.
If we were to be standing in the room as a man or a woman from the Elizabethan period, and we're getting ready to wash our hair, what would we expect to be present in the room in terms of, tools or apparatus for washing your hair? What would that look like?
I love that question because I find material culture so interesting and so telling about a time. And of course, it always boils down to wealth. So that would very much depend on how wealthy the person was. If you're thinking of someone wealthy, a Tudor hair maintenance routine would require specific equipment. You would expect to see a basin, an ewer for pouring water, a chafing dish to heat the liquids, scented waters, ivory combs, because if you're wealthy, you're not using wooden combs usually, it's ivory combs, and natural sponges, right? Because you would rub the scalp as well. And we get a kind of glimpse of this in Shakespeare in The Taming of the Shrew, even though it's not about hair. It's about the hands, but it gives you an idea. So I copied down the passage here because I think it's very evocative. So there's the scene. The setup is that a lord is playing a prank on a man who's drunk. So he takes the man from the ale house to his own luxurious house. And he tells the servants to treat this man like a lord who's recovering from an illness. So that's the prank. This is the passage. This is what this nobleman is saying. He says, "Let one servant attend him, the drunk man, with a silver basin full of rose water and bestrewed with flowers. Another bear the ewer, the third a diaper, so a piece of cloth, and say, 'Will it please your lordship to cool your hands?'" So it's an idea of what grooming would look like. And I just think this scene gives you such a good idea of the kind of grooming that Tudor elites would expect. Now, thinking of hair specifically, I think the most heavily used tool in any bedchamber was probably the comb. Wooden combs were the standard choice for, the middling sort, but the elites would have combs made from ivory, like I mentioned, or tortoiseshell. And they would usually be double-sided. You would have a side with finer teeth. The reason why manufacturers would cut the teeth of these combs really incredibly fine was to physically drag the dirt and the grease away, plus lice, nits, whatever else you had on your hair. And the stiff brushes people also used, made from boar bristles, they were also kept on the dressing table, and they would kind of help smooth the hair after detangling it. So quite a lot of objects, and the level of luxury, of course, would change depending on your budget, really.
Julia writes that there was a special towel used for hair washing and that some of these artifacts actually survived to the present day. Julia, tell us about these towels that were used for hair washing in Shakespeare's lifetime, and where can we see some examples of this kind of cloth?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's brilliant when we have examples of things like that surviving, because the more an object is used for everyday life, and the more ubiquitous it is, the harder it is sometimes for it to survive because people use it all the time. But some of them have survived. Now, these cloths or towels, they would have two main functions. And again, you could clean your hair by combing it or washing it or a mix of both. Now, the primary method for cleaning the head was this dry combing, so without water. And so wealthier people would wear combing cloths, so peignoirs. They would wrap this cloth, this towel around themselves to protect their clothing from the falling debris, from whatever was falling, nits and lice included, from your head. This linen would also absorb the excess oils and grease and dandruff while the person was sitting there or standing for their daily grooming. The other use for a cloth would be for when the hair was washed, so with water, and you would wrap around the hair to dry it. And we know that because there are so many descriptions of women doing this, especially the towels, these cloths were longer than a towel for drying your body. And the reason why you would do this and why it was so important was because doctors believed that hair washing could weaken the body. It opened the pores of the skin, and so it made the body vulnerable to disease. So it was important to keep warm, to rest, and to wrap your head really well after you had washed it. The place to see these objects, here in London at least, is the Victoria and Albert Museum. There are a few surviving examples of these cloths, and what I found most interesting about them is that makers would sometimes decorate the most expensive versions of these for wealthy people with embroidery, sometimes very intricate embroidery around the edges. And the motifs could even depict the same botanicals that people would be using in the waters for washing their hair. So you would have things like rosemary or lavender, and they would be used in this the sweet lice for washing. And when the towels or cloths were stored in wooden chests, they would be layered with sweet bags, so bags filled with dried flowers to perfume them before use. So, and I like picturing that sort of a noblewoman opening a wooden chest to find a sweet-smelling towel. It's so evocative, I think.
It's a beautiful idea, and not altogether a bad one. I'm thinking I'm going to go store some sweet bags in with my towel cabinet now. That's actually a good idea.
Yeah. I have sachets of lavender. Why not?
I mean, absolutely. Let's add that to our routine. It's not often we can steal things from the Tudor era and say that they will work. So when we can find them, let's do that.
I agree.
How long would they leave their hair wrapped in a towel like that after they washed their hair? Would they ever have to walk around in that, like in a public space, or would they, just stay cloistered?
I think not in a public space. You could be, depending on the length of your hair, the thickness, the time would change, but you could use these towels for a couple of hours in your bed chamber, maybe in front of a fire, something like that, but not for too long and not in public, I don't think. But we do have a few records of women. I think, if I remember correctly, it was Lucrezia Borgia, so in Italy, saying that she couldn't go to a party, she couldn't attend a ball or something like that because she was washing her hair that night. And so that would take hours and hours because she had gloriously long, beautiful hair. And so it would take a lot of time to wash it and to dry it with the towel in front of the fire, plus the perfumes and scents and all things. So so we know it was quite an elaborate procedure depending on the woman.
If you're enjoying learning about hair care in Shakespeare's lifetime and would like to go one step further into the history, then join us inside That Shakespeare Society. We have paintings, primary documents, museum material, and more history that goes along with Julia's research into hair care for Tudor England. And you also have the opportunity to submit your questions directly to the guest after the show. Visit our episode page at CassidyCash.com/episode 424 and click That Shakespeare Society to explore all the insider extras while you listen to the show. And now, back to the conversation. What was the most popular style of hair for women? Was there a specific look that was considered most ideal? And what kinds of products were used to achieve that style if you weren't naturally born with these features?
I mean, there are always impossible beauty standards for women to follow, I think, regardless of the time we're talking about, which is, lovely. But the aesthetic ideal for Tudor women, which was similar to other places in Europe, was usually fair hair, so blonde, strawberry blonde, and a high, broad forehead. And we know that women famously would sometimes pluck their hairlines to achieve this look. And in terms of the color, to attain this blonde or reddish gold color, they could apply lightness. Now, in the same book I mentioned before, The Secrets of Alexis, there are recipes for bleaching your hair, and they could be quite harsh formulas. So they could be a mixture of alum, sulfur, celandine, ash, and these recipes were incredibly popular in northern Italy, and that's where the book comes from. And when these books were translated, the recipes became available virtually everywhere, and so the fashion trend was everywhere in a few years. It went from Venice to London, right? But not everyone approved of these formulas. In England, there was a moralist called Philip Stubbs, and he was someone who had lots of opinions, and he violently attacked these practices. He wrote a pamphlet called The Anatomy of Abuses in 1583. And I think that's the same one I mentioned in the other episode we did together. And he was complaining about children playing too much in that one. And now in this one, he's complaining about women being blonde, I guess. But anyway, so he had opinions. He condemned women really for dyeing their hair, for purchasing wigs, and he called these wigs false hair, the hair of another woman. Going back to Shakespeare, which is, of course, as always, the focus here, Shakespeare writes directly about this in The Merchant of Venice. Again, Venice, where the fashion is coming from. And so he describes I have it here, crisped, snaky golden locks that are the dowry of a second head. I love that description. But yeah, we know that's true. We know that women would sell their hair, especially poor women. And depending on your budget, if you were buying a hairpiece or a wig, you would get real hair or horse hair, or, depending on your budget, you might even get straw, really, which was not exactly chic and fashionable. But in this case, in The Merchant of Venice, it's snaky golden locks, so it's something quite pricey. And this all makes sense, I think, because Venice is where this fashion trend is coming from. And that's where Alexis' Secrets had been published, the book. And of course, Shakespeare being Shakespeare, he subverts this blonde ideal as well. And I think the best example of this is in the sonnet 130, where he writes, "If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head." So there's this idea of blackness and darkness, so very much not focusing on the blonde.
That would be Shakespeare's Dark Lady sonnet.
Yes, it would. So you know how he's not a fan of blondes necessarily, right? And yeah, I think it just gives you an idea that people were talking about these topics. People were talking about hair and having opinions and preferences. In Shakespeare's case, the Dark Lady, and The Anatomy of Abuses, the moralist's case, just against everything, basically. But yeah.
There's a whole other podcast to be put together about making your living complaining about things, I think.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
In her article for Living History on Hair Care, Julia writes that, quote, "It was believed that excrements were expelled by the body through the skin pores. It was important to keep the head clean, both the scalp and the hair itself," end quote. Julia, what care was involved in washing one's scalp? You alluded to this earlier, but I'd like to explore this concept as separate from washing the hair only. How often was someone expected to go through this hair care routine if they were trying to be hygienic? And what was the difference between washing your scalp versus washing your hair?
I think that's an important distinction. And for us today, I think it feels kind of weird almost, because we do both at the same time, right? With water. That was not always the case, right? So how often you should do it and how really depended on your bodily constitution and what your physician recommended. And if you weren't wealthy enough to have a physician, you might still be able to afford regimens of health. And these were books on how to be healthy, how to stay healthy. And so you would read them and see kind of what applied to you. Going back to the idea of excrement, so within this humoral theory framework of seeing the body and health, the hair can be considered an excrement. It's not as awful as it sounds. I think if you think that it comes from the Latin excrescere, which means, to grow out, it's something that comes out, grows out of your body. So medical texts would define the hair as a bodily waste product, and it was pushed outward, so driven outward of the body by the body's own internal heat. So to give you an idea, there was a physician called Levinus Lemnius, and he wrote about this process in 1576 in a text called The Touchstone of Complexion. So he's writing about the different kinds of bodies, and he explains how internal heat it kind of pushes fumes up to the head, and they solidify into hair. So it's kind of weird. Again, going back to Shakespeare in Hamlet, when the queen, so Hamlet's mother, she describes Hamlet's hair kind of reacting to the ghost, right? And I noted this passage because she uses the idea of excrement. She says, "Your bedded hair, like life in excrements, starts up and stands on end," because he's scared of the ghost, his father's ghost. But it's interesting because it reminds us that this idea of the hair as an excrement would not have been considered crazy. The people who were watching the play would have understood, right? So because hair was essentially expelled waste, keeping the scalp clear of blockages was something that was necessary for your health, for hygiene. And so you needed to keep your scalp clean to maintain a healthy body and especially a healthy brain. Now, the everyday task everyone should be doing is combing your hair daily. That would remove the expelled matter that built up during the night. So you would do that in the morning. And ideally, you would also get a cloth or a towel, and you would rub your scalp with that as well to attain the same goal. It would be 2 steps in the same routine. So this should be done daily. And in some of these manuals, you get very precise instructions as to how many times you should comb your hair. So one manual would say 40 times or 50 times strokes of the comb, right? So it takes quite a lot of time. Now, immersing the hair or the whole head in water would happen much less frequently. And people who were frail, such as the elderly, were believed to be too vulnerable, so that was not always recommended. Pregnant women as well. Plus, washing your hair during the winter when you had your period wasn't always a great idea. But if you were going to wash your hair with water, and if you were healthy and young and all of that, Italian doctors would usually recommend you do it once a week. And you should lean over a basin on a table to do that. And my focus again on Italian sources here is because so many of these books were being translated into English, and they were so incredibly popular here. So yeah, if you're young and healthy and everything's great, once a week with water, but every day with combs is the kind of ideal, I guess.
Well, were there any health reasons that a doctor might advise someone to avoid washing their hair? And I think specifically about the medical advice that would have been coming down. You've mentioned, that if someone was frail, they shouldn't necessarily wash their hair, frail for a variety of reasons. But what were the stated reasons in medical manuals, and why were doctors so concerned about hair washing?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. It's something that is striking. I think we never see it as a dangerous activity, washing your hair. But yeah, no, physicians actively discourage frequent wet washing of the head and the hair because it was believed to be potentially dangerous. So there was this physician, Andrew Boord, and he wrote in 1542 a book on how to stay healthy, a regimen of health. And he advised wiping your face daily, but not washing the head with anything wetter than a dry cloth. So he was an advocate of the kind of dry rubbing of the head, if we could say that. Now, the main issue for that is that hot water, which you would use to wash your hair, would open the pores of the scalp, right? And open pores would leave the brain vulnerable to cold air, but also to miasma, so to corrupted air. And this was believed to cause disease, right? Many kinds of disease were believed to be transmitted through corrupted air. So if your pores were open, you were vulnerable to this. You could get, for instance, a sudden chill, and the brain might condense this moisture, and the moisture could then potentially drop down into your lungs and your throat and cause internal disruptions. And this could lead to coughs or fevers. So there was this potential of danger of illness. Shakespeare does mention these kind of cold diseases, right? He talks about the bone ache in Troilus and Cressida. And so there was a trade-off here, right? You could wash your hair, like hair washing could be helpful in keeping the body healthy, but you should be careful of when and how you do it and how strong your body is, because otherwise you are opening yourself to potentially these kind of cold diseases, but also diseases caused by corrupt air, by miasma. So it's something that you need to be mindful about. And that's why so many physicians thought that you shouldn't, especially in somewhere like England, because with this physician I mentioned, Andrew Boyd, his writing here in Britain is not the same as, in the Mediterranean, where it's not as awful, the weather as it is here. So I think there's lots of reasons, but the main thing is you could potentially fall ill. And that's precisely what you don't want, because the idea for keeping your hair clean is for you to be healthy.
I will place links to Julia's living history article on the history of shampoo. And of course, we will recommend you explore her publications for more great history on this topic. But Julia, if we're new to the idea of hair care and hygiene from Shakespeare's lifetime, and we're all excited now to dive into the history and learn more, where would you suggest we begin to really explore this topic well?
I love this question because I love recommending books to people. So I have several, but I'll just give you a couple. So there's a book called Women, Beauty and Power in Early Modern England by Edith Snook. And it's really interesting because it's about cosmetics and medical recipes and women kind of having authority and managing their household. So it's interesting. It's very feminist. Another good one is Cosmetics in Shakespearean and Renaissance Drama. That's by Farah Karim Cooper, I think. This is all about the ingredients and the cultural reception of these kind of recipes when they are mentioned on the stage. So it's focused on the stage. And another one that is really, really cool is Dressing Up, Cultural Identity in Renaissance Europe by Yulinka Rublak. I really like her work. She's a very interesting researcher. And she talks about the broader context of Renaissance grooming and bodily presentation. And the last one I'll mention, just because I was talking so much about Italy today, is Professor Jill Berg's new book, well, fairly new, it's a couple of years old now, but it's called How to Be a Renaissance Woman. And it's very cool. It's about these all these recipes. And what is very cool about her work is that she focuses a lot on the practical side of recipes. So she includes in the book adapted versions of shampoo and conditioner and soap and moisturizer. And if you want to try them at home, she has already tried them and sort of given the possible reasonable adaptations that you might want to do. So these are all great books, but I think Jill Berg's is the coolest one to read because you get to recreate the recipes. And I think as people who are interested in history, we always want to be closer to it and feel, smell what history would have smelled like and felt like. So I think that's a good one.
How exciting. No, it's always fun to get to try historical recipes at home and to do them safely, which is what I appreciate about books like that, where they tell you, okay, here's how you can adapt this and still get the experience without the danger, which is good.
Without arsenic and lead.
Yeah, precisely. Yes. Leaving those out. Yulinka Rublak has been on our show previously, and she actually talked with us about her book. Yeah, about it's Gallant Fellows and Their Feathered Hats. We talked with her all about hats.
Gosh, yeah.
So
she's brilliant.
It was so much fun. But along with links to these wonderful recommendations, we'll also link you to that episode as well, so you can explore the full range of cosmetic and dressing up for the stage. So now we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible. So your choice would be in addition to those. And I will say, since you've been a guest before, you do have the option of choosing the same book as last time, or you can pick a new one, but that's totally up to you.
Mm-hmm. No, I'll pick a new one then, because, the more the merrier.
Maybe you can have more. That's always good.
Oh, it's such a tough question, though. It's a great question because it really makes you think, if I had nothing else, what would I read over and over? I would probably go with anything by Clarice Lispector. And I don't know if you know her. She was a Ukrainian/Brazilian novelist. I don't know if you've heard of her.
I do not, but I'm excited to hear more.
So really, really, truly wonderful. She was born she was born Ukrainian, but then she lived in Brazil for most of her life. And if you like kind of the modernist stream of consciousness, kind of Virginia Woolf vibe, which I love, then you will love Clarice as well. She's fantastic. And she's someone who's getting more international attention now. She's been translated into English, which is fantastic. And whenever I see her in a bookshop in London, I'm like, yes, go explore the world of Clarice because she's fantastic. So, yeah.
Well, very exciting. What a great choice. I like that one. So what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
So I'm currently working on a few different projects that I can't say too much about just yet, annoyingly. But in the meantime, I can say that I have quite a few new YouTube videos lined up, especially on the history of medicine and recipes, which is what I love researching the most, just going through the recipes. And yeah, so I think history of medicine has my focus right now. I've been thinking about broader subjects that I haven't touched yet on my channel, like hysteria, or that I have mentioned only briefly, and the long history of these categories. So yeah, so I've been really, really focusing on researching history of medicine as much as I can and trying to condense everything into videos. So yeah, so I think the YouTube channel has been taking up most of my time currently. Yeah.
Very exciting. And Julia's YouTube channel is a very thrilling place to explore all kinds of history. So we'll place links to that so you can go and check that out as well. Definitely going to be looking forward to the videos that you put out there. This was a really fun look at the realities of daily life from Shakespeare's lifetime and getting to explore what some of these everyday tasks would have been like for ordinary people. Thank you so much for joining us and being here to share this piece of history.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. And thank you for letting me go on and on about all the references that I found. And I just get so excited when I get examples from Shakespeare. So yeah, anyway.
We love it so much. I mean, I think some of the scenes that you mentioned, it just brings those things to life. We never would have known the importance of excrement in context of Hamlet's hair standing on end if you hadn't have shared these things with us. So thank you so much.
But that's the thing about Shakespeare, right? There's always another layer. There's just,
always.
And that's why you could spend your life studying his works, and people do, obviously. So
well,
lucky for us. Yeah, as you should. Why not?
All of the resources we mentioned today, including details on Julia Martin's work, the recommended resources that she shares with you today, and links to related episodes, including Julia's previous episode here on That Shakespeare Life, are all waiting for you right now on our episode page at CassidyCash.com/episode 424. And if today's conversation has piqued your interest and you'd like to dive even deeper into hair care for the Elizabethan age, be sure to check out the bonus history content inside That Shakespeare Society. Just click the Society buttons available at our episode page. Again, that URL is CassidyCash.com/EP424. That Shakespeare Life is researched and produced by me, Cassidy Cash. Our audio engineer is Gary Mayholm. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.